Hi, everybody. This is Blaine DeSantis, and I welcome you to another edition of Books and Looks. Yes, it's our weekly voyage of discovery in the wonderful world of books, books that I've read and authors that I've interviewed. Today, we are joined by Marlie Wasserman. Marlie has written a wonderful, I do mean the word wonderful, historical crime fiction book called Inferno on Fifth. And she takes us back 125 years ago to St. Patrick's Day. St. Patrick's Day, 1899, for the last major tragedy of that time and that year, that century, the fire that burned down the entire Windsor Hotel in Manhattan. We're talking about a conflagration that burned down an entire city block. That's how big this hotel was. It had famous people in it, it had infamous people living in it. She brings us all together. And 125 years later, we still don't know what happened. We don't know what was the cause of it. We don't know certain aspects of the fire. She's going to try to put this all together for us and tell us about this. This is a great book. I'm going to tell you what, she has got so many characters, and every chapter is another character's name, and you give their point of view. It's like you're watching TV almost, and you're watching, let's say, CNN, and they're talking to Joe Blow, and then you watch Fox News, and they're talking to Sally Doe, and boom, 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 boom. Everybody's putting their 2 cents into what happened, and no one knows exactly what happened. And it's in 1899. What research? What research? What a great book. You're going to really love this. So, hey, let's just go right to that interview with Marlie Wasserman. Marlie, welcome to Books and Looks.
Thank you so much. It's great to be here, especially as we approach St. Patrick's Day, which, as features prominently in my book. So thank you.
Well, I'm glad we could have you here in this timing. I know we would have liked to have you on last year, but that coincidental fact that this fire occurred on St. Patrick's Day made this sort of the appropriate book for that holiday, unfortunately. But before we get into the book, tell me a little bit about yourself. Where are you from? Where did you go to school? Did you take any writing classes? Tell us a little bit background.
So I've lived all over, but I was born in Chicago and spent my first, 18 years there. And then I went to school at Duke in North Carolina. And then I moved back to Chicago, and then I moved back to North Carolina, so I bounced around a lot, but I never thought I would be a writer. Life changes,
Mhm.
and, although I was always a reader, and people will say that that's kind of one of the cliches that writers say, but I can't emphasize enough how important that was in really opening up my mind to the possibilities, the things you could do, the things you could create through writing. I worked as a scholarly publisher for many, many years, both in New York and in New Jersey. And as a scholarly publisher, I had to read a lot of very boring, sleep-inducing, nonfiction using the passive voice, and somehow I survived that. And because I was a manager or an administrator, I wrote a lot of reports. So writing for me for decades was just one report after another, reports and sometimes descriptions of the books that I was presenting for publication. But I had no creative writing experience. No, I had never taken a creative writing course. So, right about the time COVID began to hit, I decided to kind of challenge myself to see if I could learn everything I didn't know about creative
Mhm.
writing.
Mhm.
And thank goodness for Zoom and the internet because I was able to do that. And I continue to educate myself. We're never at the height of what we can do. We should always be striving to do something better. So I'm sort of a self-taught with the help of Zoom instructors and critique groups. I'm pretty much of a self-taught
Mhm.
writer. and enjoying every minute of it.
Oh, that's great. How long were you in the scholarly publishing, business?
Well, I'm going to admit 40 years.
Oh my
And
word.
during that time, yeah, during that time, as you can imagine, I saw sort of a revolution in publishing from the print book to the ebook, and from having a lot of stock to kind of just in time print on demand publishing.
Mhm,
Most readers think that's only a change in technology, but it's also really a change in all the backroom functions, all the accounting, all the licenses, all
mhm.
the contracting that people don't see. So I feel like I lived through a massive change, and I helped the publishing houses I was associated with manage that change. I hope decently. And now I'm happy to be on the other side of the desk.
Well, good. 40 years is a long time to reading sort of stuffy nonfiction stuff, scholarly. Ooh, good for you. I think you could stick it out.
I
But you're not
survived.
the only author that I've spoken to who says that when they began, they had never taken any sort of creative writing classes, and then they start, boom, they feel like I got to do this. I could learn that, and yeah, it's very similar to some other authors I've spoken with. That's very great. Now, are yours associated with colleges, or are they just local groups that you meet with to get input?
The current critique groups
Hmm.
and critique buddies that I have, you
Yes.
mean?
Uh-huh.
Um, a variety. My brother is a very well regarded professor of American literature.
Mm.
So he reads everything I write, and, with
Okay.
the technological equivalent of a red pencil.
Hmm.
So he's sort of one, and then I found a wonderful mystery writer in Virginia, and he and I share chapters with each other. And then I'm a member of several writers' associations that have critique groups. So, I'm still kind of working my way through this critique
Hmm.
um, process, or some people call it beta readers. But I think it's really important to get a variety of viewpoints.
Very good, very true. Well, now you, I think, are one of the best. Uh, I think you described it historical crime fiction authors. Why did you go into that genre of writing?
Uh, Well, I can give you a couple of answers. One is that I love, let's just stick with the historical part of it for a minute. I love historical fiction. I love reading it. I love writing it. One of the advantages for me is that it provides a frame. And I'm going to sort of exaggerate to make the point. It does half the work for me. It gives me a setting. It gives me almost the skeleton of a plot, the way I do it, because of the continuum of writers who write historical fiction. Mine is very tied in with history, as you know. Other people write what they call historical fiction, but it's really a story that they happen to set in a historical time. My books are all motivated by actual events. And I love that because it gives me an opportunity to tell readers what everyone knew at the time of the event. That's my skeleton. But also to fill in, you might call it the tissue, with everything that was not known. Even today, with this 24-hour reporting, you never hear the full story. There are always viewpoints you haven't heard. So that's the history part. The crime part, well, one of the things I learned through my tutorials is that all fiction has to center on conflict. And we don't think that immediately because, we think of books we've read where there's no sword play or gunfights or whatever. But there is always conflict, whether it's internal or external. So having a crime at the center or even the edges of a book gives you an automatic way to get that conflict. and the tension that comes with conflict into your fiction.
Well, you do a wonderful job with it. Yeah, growing up, you said you were a voracious reader. Who are some of your favorite authors and books?
So, this is a question that I'm asked a lot, and it's a slightly difficult question for me because I was a voracious reader, but an undisciplined reader. So, I can't say that I read all of this kind of book or that I have a favorite book that influenced me. The reading I did was just all over the place, and there's not even one book that sticks in my mind. It's more the experience of immersing myself in books that stick in my mind. But I will say that once I decided to do historical crime fiction, I started to read some of the contemporary authors who are doing that, who for me are sort of models, you know. Um, and one of them is Mariah Fredericks. And she has done many books set roughly in the same time period that I write in. Her most recent, well, her second to most recent, which I just read, is called The Lindbergh Nanny. And I wish I had done that myself. The story of the kidnapping through the nanny's point of view. So that's the kind of influence that I feel now, or a woman named Susan Meisner, who wrote a historical novel on the, Spanish flu in Philadelphia in
Oh,
1918. That I read as I was beginning to write. So I can't go back to my childhood and my adolescence and tell you what was formative for me, but what was formative is these books by really experienced, excellent writers, and when I read them, I try and kind of deconstruct them. I try and figure out what about
mhm,
these
mhm.
makes them so good to
Right,
me,
right.
and
What
I
makes them
learn
click?
from.
Mhm. Great. Oh, that's wonderful. Yeah. Now, this book, Inferno on Fifth, I call this the last great tragedy of the 19th century. I don't think there's anything in the last 9 months that topped it. How how did you pick this? How did you find this and decide you wanted to do this as a book?
Yeah. So, I my first 2 books, have Teddy Roosevelt in them as either as a kind of a character in the background, but that required me to do a whole lot of research on Teddy Roosevelt. One of the my first book had to do with a woman who committed a crime and then was sentenced to die in the electric chair in Sing Sing around the same time as the Windsor fire. And she, petitioned to the governor of New York for clemency. The governor of New York at that time happened to be Teddy Roosevelt. So I was reading a lot on this, and
Mhm.
now you can get huge numbers of papers digitally through the Library of Congress. So I was reading about what Teddy Roosevelt decided to do, and he decided in the end not to grant clemency. But I digitally opened a newspaper dated March 18th, 1899, and there was the story of Roosevelt deciding not to grant clemency, and the story of the woman eating her last meal, prepping for
Mhm.
the execution
Mhm.
on one side, and on the other side was the story of the Windsor fire. It appeared March 18th because, you know, reporters couldn't send in their stories on the internet like they
Yeah.
can today.
Yeah. Yeah.
So by the time the story of the Windsor fire on March 17th got into the papers, it was already the 18th. So I had never heard of this fire before until I saw that on the other side on the same day that I was reading about Roosevelt.
Okay. That's fascinating. That's fascinating. Wow. What a coincidence. They would be on the same newspaper. That's the same day. Fascinating. Now,
Right. And it's because it was so dramatic and because it was unknown. I thought, well, let me do a little research and see just make sure that this fire was as important as I think it was, and also who was caught up in it. And so that just piqued my interest and kept me going.
Good, great. Now, before we get into the book, would you be able to read a little bit of the book, a selection from the book to whet our appetite?
Yeah, I'd be happy to.
Oh,
And
thank you so much.
I'll go into the first chapter, and I'm
Mm,
going to read just a tiny bit more than one page. I'm not going to read the whole chapter. But it opens the book, and the chapter title is Hugh Bonner, and you'll see who he is in a minute. He heard high pitched screams, soft flames rising, more screams. 3 blocks from the New York's Windsor Hotel at 3:16 in the afternoon on March 17th, 1899, Fire Chief Hugh Bonner sat on the edge of his seat of the fire wagon. A fireman on the back bench swung around to clang the brass bell mounted on the wagon's side. Not loud enough. Bonner twisted to ring it himself, then shouted above the rising noise, ordering the driver beside him to hurry. As Bonner turned, he saw 3 other fire wagons behind him rushing too. Hold tight, the driver snarled as he prodded the horses around the St. Patrick's Day revelers on Fifth Avenue. But even at 59, Bonner didn't need to hold on. He had ridden these wagons since he turned 17. He'd also marched with the revelers every year. Today he cursed him for for blocking his driver's path. From 3 short blocks away, Bonner's eyes fixed on the upper floors. He saw women dangling from ropes, spinning, their full skirts billowing. 4 struggled down a few feet and then must have let go, plummeting. 2 more didn't try the rope. They jumped from the 5th and 6th floors. More women sat on windowsills, bracing to jump. A man plunged down. From a block away, Bonner could hear only the sound of ringing alarm bells and yells of the crowd, as he had seen enough fires up close to imagine sickening thumps as he saw women fall and jump to the unforgiving sidewalk on Fifth Avenue. One struck an iron spiked fence, impaled. The driver struggled to keep his horses from rearing and managed to maneuver the fire wagon into a narrow space at the curb. Bonner and his men leapt forward. The chief saw twisted bodies, maybe dead, maybe injured, lying amid police vans and ambulances, mostly women's bodies, some in silk dresses, some in cotton maids' uniforms. 2 men's bodies, both in fine suits. Bonner pushed through the mass of yelling bystanders, necks bent back, chins up, coughing, scanning the windows. Following their gaze, he saw dozens of his firemen, the men who arrived first from closer stations, climbing on ladders linked together, straining to pass women, some limp, some flailing from one man to another. Good men, trained men, his firefighters would do the best. He estimated that with the men in the wagons beside him, 50 would soon be on the scene. Bonner spotted Ninth Battalion Chief John Binns, now the top man at the site, giving orders. How the hell did it spread so fast? Bonner asked, and so on.
There you go. Very good. It sets the scene. We've got a big conflagration, I'll tell you that much. Wow. You know, as I'm reading this, I could be reading September 11th, reminding me so much of the situation. People jumping out of the building, trying to get emergency people, some people who did get in there, firemen to help. Was that always your intent with that parallel?
Yes, Blaine, I think that's very observant of you. When 9/11 happened, I was in New Jersey, and I was actually close enough as birds fly,
Mhm.
so that I could see the planes scrambling. We didn't know what was the end of 9/11. The one, two, three. Could there be four and five? So I looked up and I saw the planes, and it was just terrifying for everyone, and
Mhm.
with an extra layer for those of us who were near New York at the time. for me, the parallels with this Windsor fire are first that people have a tendency to ignore a disaster in the beginning. So, we know that some of the people who were in the Twin Towers started down the stairs and then were told they didn't have to, and they went back up. So it's not always apparent the extent of the disaster. And at the Windsor fire, well, I have some racial bias in there when the clerk clerks behind the front desk refused to listen to a black observer who has noticed the fire. But even without that sort of shameful incident, it's entirely possible that the clerks behind the desk would not have been aware of what was raging just a floor or two above them. So, we like to think that we would all immediately react in the right way. That's not always what happens in both 9/11 and the Windsor fire. But the other parallel that is even more obvious is that when the Twin Towers fell, it, you know, holding aside the 300 plus victims for a second, the other thing that happened was a whole swath of New York was in ruins. And we know that from the images and the firefighters and so on and so forth. Um, in a similar manner, in 1899, when the Windsor Hotel collapsed, an entire square block of Midtown Manhattan turned to rubble. So that doesn't only that affects life in many ways. One thing is it's a constant reminder, a visual reminder of the horrors that happen. It also makes transportation very difficult. People couldn't get around that part of New York. They could not get around with their carriages midtown Manhattan, and it makes the cleanup a major part of the story. So you're very perceptive, Blaine, in noting that parallel, and it was on my mind.
Well, that was really good. Now, this was you said this is a city block uh, building. This is huge, huge building. Uh, Now we've whetted everybody's appetite. We know there's a fire. Tell us a little bit about this and who are the main. Would you call it two or three main characters of the book?
Well, I wish I could tell you just 2 or 3. So what I'm going to do, since there were more than 2 or 3, is just go very carefully through them. And they were very quickly, I should say. They were in my head divided into 2 categories. There were the rich people and there were the poor people, to
Hmm.
simplify it. And to exemplify the rich people, I picked 3 women, Marguerite Wells, Theodore Pope, and Angelina Gary. And we can talk about them later, but they all had connections in one way or another to the fire. They were either in the fire or near the fire or connected to the fire in some other way. And then I also picked 3 maids at the Windsor, the people who clean the rooms, the chambermaids. Brigitte Dunn, who was sort of the leader of this little group of maids, and
Hmm.
Tara Reagan and Molly Dugan. They were all of Irish descent, but had most of them had been in the United States for either their whole lives or a large part of their lives. There are also some guys around. Who are either connected with the hotel or connected with these women. But for the most part, I tried to structure the book so that you have the 3 maids and you have the 3 wealthier people, and you see what they have in common and what they don't have in common.
Okay, great. Now, one of the things that I like personally are the number of characters in your book. I love a lot of characters, a lot of points of view. And like you said, not everybody pays attention. So you're going to get conflicting things, and that's become your style. The, the books that I've read, I read the one in the Panama Canal. I read that book also. You had a lot of people giving their point of view. Is that now your trademark? Is that how you like writing?
The short answer is yes, and then I'll elaborate a bit. I think that's just the way my mind works. I'm one of those people who can see every side of an issue, for better or sometimes for worse. The idea of writing through a single point of view is just sort of, I can't imagine doing it because it's not to me the way life does or should work. Now, once I started writing, I realized that if I have multiple points of view, if I have many characters and I'm switching up and back between them, it places a burden on me that I'm trying to deal with of reminding authors who a character is. I mean, reminding readers who a character is.
Mhm, mhm,
Most readers do not sit down at 8 in the morning and keep going on the book, skipping meals, skipping sleep until they
mhm,
finish. You pick up a book, you have interruptions, you forget who the characters are, you go back
mhm.
to it 3 days later. So I'm sort of trying out various techniques to remind readers. I'm not willing to just move to 1 or 2 points of view. But I'm trying as I go along in my writing to subtly, without being too obvious about it, refresh readers' memories on the characters. And the book I'm working on now, which we'll talk about later, um, I will still have many characters, not quite as many. With each book, I'm trying to slightly, reduce the number of characters, but there'll always be many.
Okay. I tell you, it's interesting you mentioned that because I'm reading a mystery book right now, and I'm lost. I am lost. I can't keep the characters straight. I don't know who's who. They're always using a first name, and I go looking back. It's very difficult, and I thought it was just me being 70 years old, and my mind's starting to go. I don't know, but yeah, that's interesting. Very interesting.
And I
Now,
should
one of
add,
the
it's even harder. It's even harder with ebooks because with ebooks, it's harder to,
oh,
you know,
to find
go
it.
back
Yep.
and
Yeah.
find it, right.
Yeah. I think go back to where you were before. It's very difficult. Now, what I like about it, and it reminds me of your writing, reminds me of CNN or Fox News or whatever these 24-hour news services. This everybody wants to get the man on the street, woman on the street. Oh, what do you see? What did you see? This is exactly what your book's like. Again, did this influence your writing style on this?
Well, it did an aspect of this influence my writing style because when you keep getting these different slices, you're reminded that it comes back to what we were saying a few minutes ago. You're reminded that there are multiple ways to look at the same event. And this comes through in my book in a slightly modified way. Once I started researching it, I was shocked at the conflicting newspaper accounts. So you had reporters standing in front of the fire, all the chaos that I began to describe through that reading, and they all see different things. And they all, maybe smoke is in their eyes, or their eyes are tearing, or someone yells, "Oh, that's Mrs. So and so jumping from the fifth floor." And then someone else yells, "No, it's, Mrs.
Mhm.
something else." So there are so many conflicting stories. And I decided at first I was troubled by this because I do a lot of research. I take pride in getting the facts right. I want to come to the truth of whatever there is.
Mhm.
And then I realized, well, this is actually part of the story because if I can't exactly follow what's going on or who was involved, it means that the people involved in the fire could also be confused about what went on. So, I would say that whether we're talking about 100 years ago or we're talking about what we see on TV news and radio news today, we're getting multiple stories, and sometimes they fit together and sometimes they don't. and it's actually those fissures, those points where they don't fit together that sometimes create the biggest drama.
Well, and back then, I don't know, it's in your book how many of them, but I mean, how many different daily newspapers were there who were reporting? And everybody had to have a scoop and everybody had to have a different point of view.
Exactly. And one of the things I realized, I guess people who know the history of newspapers understand this, but I didn't. Most of those articles are unsigned. So, 100 years ago, who knows who was a reporter for this paper or that paper? So I couldn't even get a sense of, is one person reporting accurately and another reporter isn't? The newspapers in New York covered the story well, but there was a major one in Brooklyn that covered it even better, and then there was some equivalent of wire services because newspapers in, Wichita, Kansas picked up on these stories, often repeating bad facts.
Yes, that's the thing. Wow. You know what they say, garbage in, garbage out. If you get bad facts, you repeat bad facts. Well, anyway, now
Exactly.
there are a couple more historical figures. There's some men at the hotel. Uh, I think, who were they and why were they at the hotel at that time? How'd you find them?
Yeah. So, one of the reasons that I was so captivated by this horrific fire was because of the number of people who were there, many of whom were well known, and the people who also got involved in the investigation. Almost everyone I talk about in this regard is an actual historic figure who I discovered from the newspaper accounts. So you open the newspaper accounts on March 18th, reporting on the 17th, or March 19th, reporting on the 18th, because it's always a
Mhm,
day
mhm,
off,
mhm,
and you see one famous name after another. You never saw the names of the maids and the busmen and, footmen, but you always saw the rich people. In those days, it wasn't like people were staying in a Holiday Inn Express, If you stayed in a hotel, you were usually wealthy, especially if it was a hotel in Manhattan. So a lot of these people were very wealthy, and I could sit and write 3 more books because I had to pick just some of the people, or I'd have even more characters than I have. So one of the characters, as you know, is Abner McKinley, and that really sort of was a pivot point for me. Abner McKinley was, the the beloved brother of President William McKinley. And he wasn't exactly the most ethical guy. It's funny because if you think back over some of our recent presidents going back, I don't know, I'm going to say 50 years, many of them have brothers or nieces or nephews or there's some slime somewhere in their family. Now, Abner McKinley was not slimy, but he did press the boundaries of business dealings,
mhm.
and he undoubtedly peddled his influence, to add to his, coffers. He was a lawyer by training, but he kind of brokered a lot of deals, and he always had to at least have the appearance of being squeaky clean. So he's one of them. And what he did is he kind of took rooms at the Windsor for, I'm going to say, roughly half the year because so many of his business dealings involved being in New York. And he had a wife and a child, a adult daughter who had a serious problem with a foot. And so, she was one of the people who she did manage to survive the fire, but with great difficulty because, of her immobility. So that was one of the characters, and then there were, I could go on. I could talk
Yeah.
forever about some of these characters,
Wow.
but the other thing I'll mention is that the police chief, who was a guy named, Big Bill Big Bill Devery. He's a historic character, very unsavory, did all sorts of unethical things, and he was the boss of my chief detective, George, I'm blocking on his last name, George
McCloskey?
McSomething. McCloskey,
McCloskey,
thank
that's
you.
mm,
And George McCloskey was really the first big detective in New York City. And if I were to start a book series, I would be, which I'm not going to do, I'm not a series writer, but someone could easily do a book series on McCloskey. He was a great character, and it goes on and on. As I said, I'm gonna stop talking because
yeah.
I'm fascinated by all of these people and could talk endlessly about them.
Maybe after the interview, we will talk endlessly, you and I, one day about this. I love it. This is one fantastic. Now, Annie, of all the women who you bring in here, well, before the women, we make a point where at one point you're saying that the owner of the hotel is basically bragging that everything's up to code, up to code. Well, when was that code enacted, and was it still up to code in 1899?
Yeah, so I'm sure that, there are parallels to what's going on today with, codes, building codes, as you're sort of suggesting, the problem was that there was a code, New York City Fire Code. I don't remember the exact date. Let's say it was enacted around 1880. And Warren Leland, who was the manager of the Windsor, was a very responsible manager, and he pretty much kept his hotel up to that code. I mean, he stalled a little bit on getting the fire escapes up, and a few other things, but the city gave him a little leeway, and he was never cited for anything. He pretty much followed the code. The problem is that by 1899, the code was, that code was useless. There was a new code, but none of the regulators could hold the hotel to the new code. They were sort of, I think the term is grandfathered. And
Mhm.
if you think about it, electricity had just come to New York. One of the reasons I love the period that I write about is because of all we have technological changes. Well, there were a lot of changes going on
Mhm.
then. Suddenly the streets were lit, the hotels were lit, there was plumbing, I could go on and on about that as well. But the 1880, I'm off by a couple of years, but the 1880 code did not pay much attention to wiring
Mhm.
in buildings, to, the rules for how a building or a home or a hotel should be wired. So it was an outdated code, and there was a lot of drama around that. Only a little bit did I bring into the book, but everyone was blaming, what do you call it, a circular firing squad or
Mhm.
something like that. Everyone was blaming everyone else for not following the code or not pointing out which hotels were dangerous. And,
Mhm.
it's kind of 11th hour, what do you call it? Quarterbacking. There's another
Mhm.
term I'm
Yeah,
not
yeah,
coming up
Sunday morning quarterback or Monday morning quarterback. Yeah, exactly.
with.
Wow.
Yeah.
Well, now you focus on a lady by the name of Marguerite Wells. Is she a historical character? And why did you decide her to be the person investigating on the side?
Right. So, I wanted to choose a main character. Although I have many characters, I wanted one to kind of run through the book and one that readers could connect with. I love Marguerite Wells, largely because although she's wealthy, she's what I call an insider slash outsider, and as a result can bring sort of a heightened level of observation to the scene. So what do I mean by insider outsider? Well, she was an insider because her father was a banker, he owned railroads, he was very wealthy, and he hobnobbed with a lot of tycoons. But Marguerite and her whole family was from North Dakota. And because of their money, they were able to make connections in New York. She went to school on the East Coast, but she always was aware that she was from North Dakota. And, all the jokes about who's ever heard of North Dakota, who's
Mhm.
ever been to North Dakota. So she always had a little bit of a chip on her sleeve. I think that's the expression about where she had grown up. So that's why I call her an insider outsider. And in my experience, it's those people who can often add the greatest insights to what's going on around them.
Okay. That's very good. Very good. Now, one of the things that she did was she did research. And just sort of bring in the tie-in, you start in 2020 or so, you're doing Zooms and you're searching all over the internet. She went to what did they do before the internet? You went to the library and you found your papers or whatever. That a very slow process back then. Yeah, yeah.
Exactly, exactly. And I was hoping that I could have her go to the New York Public Library, which, most people who have been to New York know that that's an absolutely fabulous building on
Mhm.
42nd, I don't know, in the lower 40s.
Mhm.
But I found out that it wasn't quite finished yet. It wasn't open. So I had her go, to the other end of to the south end of Manhattan for
Yeah.
the library that was there.
Well,
Yeah.
I like that a lot. I like that a
And
lot.
yeah, and she had to sort of befriend a librarian who brought her all the papers and the research tomes that she needed.
Right. Let's skip forward now. The fire is done. How many people died and how many were unidentified?
So we'll never know. If the official count is something in the low 80s, but and here's where the story gets a little gruesome. When they buried bodies, they often did not have whole bodies, so they'd have uh, an arm, and then they'd have a leg,
Right.
and they might assume that those were the same person, but they could also have been two different people. So the number of coffins that were buried in this uh, graveyard that they picked in New York State, it's really hard to count. It was in the low 80s, but my guess is that it was closer, and most historians think it was closer to 100. And I argue, or when I talk about this, I say that I think that the number could have been even higher,
Mhm.
because there were a lot of people. Going back to 9/11, there were sort of dishwashers who maybe did not have families. There were people who it was very hard to kind of find relatives. And I think the same thing happened then. And there's yet another category that speaks to your question. I believe there are some people who might have intentionally chosen to disappear.
I
Um,
agree.
what an opportunity. And I actually cut out a subplot where I had a guy who knew he was going to end up on embezzlement charges. And once the fire started, he thought, oh, I can get out of here and no one's going to get me. I ended up taking him out. But again, if I were to write another book on the Windsor fire, I might put him back in.
Mhm. Yeah, that's good. That's a good subplot. I like that a lot. I like that a lot. One of the things that struck me was everyone was in a haste to clean up the site. Do you think that actually kept them from discovering the cause of the fire?
So, to answer this, I need to add that I spent about a week trying to research the history of arson investigations. What was the stat? How was it done in 1899? And I'm not the most accomplished researcher, but I'm not the worst either. And I could not find anything on how an arson investigation was conducted then. What I did find was some terms like origin, or pathifier,
Mhm, mhm,
things that people doing arson investigations look at now.
mhm.
So, thinking back on this, noting that the whole hotel collapsed in, we can say 90 minutes, 2 hours, I'm not quite sure, but collapsed quite quickly, burying a lot. Um, I'm going to suggest that even if they hadn't cleaned it up so quickly, they wouldn't have found much.
Okay.
Uh, because the traces that people look for today would have been extremely difficult to find. I think this is one of those, I'll call it a crime, whether you call it an accident or call it a crime, that no one's really going to be able to get to the bottom of, although I have my theories.
Ah, very good. I like that. Yeah. Well, again, officially 125 years, and there's been no solution to this situation. Now, a couple, so much to talk about here, but a couple people, uh, Clayton, Byrne, and Bridget Dunn. Now, was Clayton a real character, or was he somebody you made up?
No, he was someone I made up. The one person, the one kind of bad guy, minor character who I didn't make up was a guy named Felix Kane, who was arrested because he grabbed valuables from Abner McKenzie's suite during the fire. That is one of the facts that led me to feel pretty confident that there could have been a robbery gang at the time because this guy was pretty stupid and it's unlikely he would have been at the hotel at the time, knowing where McKinley's suite was, knowing what to look for in McKinley's suite. So I have him in the book, sort of being the a minor member of the bad guys gang
Yeah.
of
Hmm.
thieves.
Hmm.
But because he really did exist, really was arrested, really was sent to the Tombs in New York, the jail, the big prison, uh, I I felt it was conceivable that there were others. So Clayton Byrne, the kind of gang leader of the thieves, I invented him, uh, but with some, justification in my head.
Okay. Good. Now, do you think that had McCluskey been allowed to investigate this fire instead of being constantly pulled off, his attention's never, do you think he could have gotten to the bottom of it? Was there anything that historically might have led us to believe that he could have figured it out?
Yes, yes. I think, and Blaine, as you've suggested, a sort of subplot here is how many times the detective is getting pulled off, often for the wrong reasons, to investigate other crimes that the chief of police thought were more important. Uh, and poor McCluskey, who really wanted to maintain his job, maintain his salary, couldn't say no. What I think he could have done is more on the robbery angle. I don't think he could have gotten to the bottom of some of the other things. I mean, there are 6 or 7 possible causes of the fire. I don't think he could have investigated the possibility that the boilers in the basement were blowing up or that
Mhm.
a guy lighting a cigar lit set a lace curtain on fire. I think those things were probably dead ends in terms of investigation. But I do think that if McCluskey had been able to interview more of the witnesses, because going back to St. Patrick's Day, there were thousands of people standing in front of that
Mhm.
hotel. And
Mhm.
surely more of them would have witnessed
Right.
guys, I'm gonna say guys, going in or out of the hotel.
Mhm.
So it is possible, and I bring that up, in the I talk about McCluskey getting pulled away in the book because he was, as I said, he was often pulled away for the wrong reasons. So, we see corruption in in political life today. We see corruption in political life then, maybe more, maybe less, depending on your point of view. But there's always someone pulling someone using influence in ways that aren't always what we would
Mhm.
like.
Right, right. Well, very interesting. We have to I don't wanna keep you much longer, because 'cause you've been so gracious to give us all this time, but one thing I wanna ask you, I'm gonna put you on the spot. What do you think or who do you think was involved? What's the cause? Tell us all about that, because we don't know.
Right, right. So I think that there could not have been a single cause. That's the main thing I bring to this discussion. The hotel burned down too fast with too little warning. Uh, f- you know, all of those. Imagine that you were a guest in a hotel and you hear some screaming, and 2 seconds later, your room is aflame. I mean, it
Mhm.
was just very sudden. So I think it started I think there were multiple causes and the fire started in multiple places because my investigation, my research on fire did suggest that um, if a if there are multiple fires, the result is not just the addition of those two fires, but it's actually like extrapolated. It gets even
Right.
worse than the two fires would have been. So I think that I believe the robbers did, set the fire as a diversionary tactic, knowing that people would be out of their rooms and
Mhm, mhm.
distracted during the St. Patrick's Day parade. But I think that something else had to happen at the same time. Maybe, something happened in the boiler, maybe something happened with wires. I'm not sure, but I do believe that it had nothing to do with Leland, Warren Leland's negligence. I don't think he was significantly negligent. But I think the robbery and thief setting the fire was probably the biggest thing, and then
Alright,
connected with another fire.
okay. Before we get to the last question, I have one other thing. Tell everybody about a fire rope. I never heard of a fire rope. That's what is a fire rope?
Can you believe it? Can you
No.
imagine checking into a Hilton and that's your means of egress? So these things they were big ropes. I'm not sure what they were made out of, except they were scratchy, they were thick, and they weren't always bracketed at one end,
Oh my.
and they had no instructions with them. So, it wasn't like when you check into a hotel today and on the back of the door you see the plan and what to do, or you see signs saying don't take elevator in case of fire.
Mhm.
The residents were just supposed to know that hiding somewhere in a closet was this rope, and then they were expected to open the window, throw down the rope, brace one end of it, don't ask me how, and climb down it. Now, you may have had more experience rope climbing than I have, but I do have a feeling that most people don't know that if you wrap your feet around the bottom, you can take some of the pressure off
Right.
your palms.
Mhm.
You know, if you've never
I know.
done rope climbing, how are you gonna know this? So
I just
people
can't
try.
imagine. There
Yeah.
you are on the
And
6th
then
floor, throw out a rope.
you have the added problem of the modesty of these,
Oh,
turn of the century
yeah,
women
yeah.
who know that you can look up their skirts if they go down on a rope. So anyway, it was a disaster.
Yeah, it really was. That's a sup I'd never heard of that. Now, hey, what's next? You said you're starting something else. What's next for Marlie Wasserman? Tell me all about it.
So I'm going back a few years, actually 4 years, and I'm looking at Grover Cleveland's
Mm,
daughters.
okay.
So Grover Cleveland was a two-term president with, 1 term in between when someone else was president. During his second administration, he, he had 3 young daughters with a very young wife. He was twice as old as this
Mm.
beautiful young wife of his. And they had 3 daughters, and they summered in a place near Cape Cod. There were always threats that not only there were threats that he would be assassinated, but there were also threats that the daughters would be kidnapped. And so I take them to their summer escape residence in Cape Cod, and I have kidnapping going on.
Okay.
And I shouldn't say more
Wow.
than that.
Now, when is that coming out? When are we gonna get that one from you, Marley?
So that one won't be out until 26 in the fall
Oh,
of 26. So
okay.
a good,
Well, 2
18 to
yeah.
24 months from now.
Oh, that's too long for me to
I've
wait.
just begun. I've
Okay.
just
Uh,
I've just
oh,
begun. And I'm
you've just begun. Well,
trying to figure out who the villain is, who is the kidnapper.
okay.
But stay tuned.
I look forward to it. Hey, anyway, Marley, thank you so much for taking this time to be with us today on Books and Looks. I really appreciate you coming on.
It's great talking to you and great answering your wonderful questions.
Well, thanks so much, Marley. That was a wonderful interview, and I hope you enjoyed it, friends, as much as I enjoyed talking with her. What am I looking at? I'm looking at what you and I are looking at. I'm looking at different perspectives of the same thing and how we don't always correspond. That's what she talked about in her book. And yet it's so true with everything we do. You see it from your point of view, I may see it from my point of view. Perspectives differ. It differs in our observations, it differs in how you may view politics, religion, science, history. We all come at things from a different perspective. And the key is not to forget that the other guy may not see exactly as you do, and to then understand that. And so that's what I'm looking at. I'm looking at making myself a better person. That's right. I'm trying to become a better person at age 70. Yep. Got to look at things from not just your point of view, but many points of view. And that's what she talks to us about in this book today. And that's very fascinating. So, anyway, on behalf of viewsonbooks.com, on behalf of my good friends at Podcast Studio X, this is Blaine DeSantis for Books and Looks, saying, may all your leaves be pages in a book.